There is a specific kind of silence that follows a lie. It's not the silence of peace. It's the silence of a held breath, of a secret taking root. For Michael Weller, a 34-year-old construction worker from Dayton, Ohio, that silence began on a Tuesday afternoon at 2:17 p.m. at the base of a skeletal new office building. One moment, he was hauling rebar, the sun glinting off his hard hat. The next, he was on the ground, and a low, guttural groan was torn from his lips. Not a scream of sharp, instant pain, but a deep, resonant moan that spoke of something fundamental breaking. He clutched the small of his back. His fingers, calloused and stained with dirt, pressed into the fabric of his shirt as if trying to hold his very spine together. His colleagues rushed over, their faces masks of genuine concern. They saw a man in agony. They saw a friend who had fallen. What they didn't see was the calculation already cooling the panic in Michael's eyes. This was the moment, the pivot point. The perfect ache had been born. In the days that followed, the ache became an entity. It had a voice, described in hushed pain tones to doctors. It had a physical form, documented on MRI scans that showed pre-existing age-related degeneration, now brilliantly repurposed as the evidence of a traumatic injury. It had a price tag. A dizzying, life-altering number. $2 million. That was the future Michael Weller now saw. A future free from the back-breaking labor, financed by the very system designed to protect him. He painted a picture of a life stolen. He spoke of being unable to play catch with his son, of sleepless nights on the floor, of a constant, grinding pain that was his new, unwelcome shadow. But every shadow needs a light to exist. And the light in this story was about to switch on. If this story is already getting under your skin, then you're in the right place. Subscribe to the channel and keep watching, because what comes next is the unraveling of a perfect lie. And while you're here, tell us in the comments below, where in the world are you watching from? And what time is it for you right now? The first checks from the insurance company arrived. They were a trickle, then a stream. They covered his medical bills, his physical therapy sessions where he would wince with exaggerated pain at the slightest touch. They covered his lost wages. But for Michael, it was never about covering losses. It was about funding a new life. And with every dollar that landed in his account, the silence around his lie grew thicker, more fortified. He started to believe it himself. The ache was no longer just an act. It was his armor, his justification. He had crossed a line, and there was no turning back. He was just a man who'd gotten hurt at work, fighting for what he deserved. That's what he told himself. But in the quiet of his own home, when he thought no one was watching, the armor would sometimes slip. A forgotten grocery bag lifted a little too easily from the trunk of the car. A moment of laughter that was a little too free, before the mask of pain was quickly, deliberately put back on. These were the tiny, invisible cracks. And cracks, no matter how small, are where the truth begins to seep through. The stream of insurance money soon carved a deep riverbed through Michael Weller's life. What began as a necessary deception to secure his comfort quickly morphed into a second, full-time job. The full-time occupation of being a broken man. His world shrank to the sterile, beige-colored offices of doctors and physical therapists. He became a connoisseur of pain, learning its specific vocabulary. It wasn't just a bad back. It was a lumbar radiculopathy, a searing nerve pain, a debilitating spasm that locked his entire lower body. He learned to walk with a subtle, guarded hesitation, a performance of fragility that was more convincing than any dramatic limp. He mastered the art of the pained grimace, not a wild contortion, but a subtle tightening around the eyes, and a sharp, controlled intake of breath when he had to shift his weight in a chair. This was the web of lies, and Michael was its meticulous architect, spinning each strand with clinical precision. The insurance adjuster assigned to his case, a man named David Clark, initially saw just another file. A construction worker, a back injury. It was tragically common. The first doctor's reports aligned with Michael's story. The initial physical therapy evaluations noted limited range of motion and patient reports significant discomfort. David authorized the payments. The system was designed to help, and Michael Weller seemed like a man who needed help. But David Clark had been in this business for 15 years. He had a kind of sixth sense, a gut feeling that tingled when a story was a little too perfect, a little too consistent. There was a passive acceptance in Michael's demeanor during their phone check-ins that felt off. Most genuinely injured people fought. They expressed frustration. They were desperate to get back to their lives. Michael seemed settled. He was patiently, methodically, building a new life around the injury, not striving to escape it. The first strand in the web quivered. It was a small thing, a single line in a report from a new physical therapist. Patient demonstrates inconsistent effort during strength testing. It was professional jargon, but for David, it was a flare in the fog. He decided to dig deeper. He requested authorization for an independent medical examination, a doctor not chosen by Michael's attorney. The report that came back was a masterpiece of medical ambiguity. It stated that while the patient presented with severe pain, the objective clinical findings did not fully support the level of claimed disability. The doctor couldn't call Michael a liar, but he had planted the seed of a very loud doubt. Meanwhile, Michael's life had developed a strange, schizophrenic quality. In public, he was Michael the incapacitated, carefully lowering himself into chairs, refusing to carry so much as a bag of groceries. But in the supposed privacy of his own home, a different man existed. A man who could spend hours working on his classic Mustang in the garage, bending over the engine bay, applying torque to stubborn bolts. A man who, on a security camera from a neighbor's house that inadvertently caught the edge of his driveway, was seen effortlessly lifting a heavy car battery. He was living a life in two frames, and he was convinced the two would never meet. The insurance money was no longer just for comfort. It was for toys, for a new boat, for a sense of security he had never known. The lie was no longer a means to an end. It had become the foundation of his entire existence. He was deep in the web now, so deep he could no longer see the edges, no longer see the patient, unblinking eyes that were starting to watch from the outside. David Clark's gut feeling had solidified into a cold, professional certainty. The file on Michael Weller was no longer just a claim. It was a puzzle, and the pieces were beginning to form a damning picture. The independent medical examination had been the key that unlocked his authority to dig deeper, to look beyond the self-reported pain and the sympathetic doctor's notes. He initiated surveillance, a standard but powerful tool in the insurance investigator's arsenal. This was the introduction of the unblinking eye, a silent, objective witness that would see what Michael chose to hide. For days, the investigators observed a man who matched the description of Michael Weller. They saw him leave his home, moving with that same careful, measured slowness. They saw him attend his physical therapy appointments, emerging each time looking weary and burdened. The initial footage seemed to corroborate his story. But patience is the currency of truth. The investigators knew that no one can perform a role 24 hours a day. The mask must eventually slip. And then it did. It was a Saturday morning. The camera, positioned in a discreet vehicle down the street, captured Michael leaving his house. He wasn't heading to a doctor's appointment. He was wearing jeans and a t-shirt, and he walked to his driveway with a purpose that was entirely absent from his medical persona. He opened his garage door, and for the next 3 hours, he was engrossed in working on his classic Mustangs. He was seen bending deeply at the waist to retrieve tools from a lower cabinet, squatting to examine the undercarriage, and using his full body weight to loosen a tire lug. There was no hesitation, no guarded movement, no sign of the debilitating back pain that he claimed made even sitting in a car an agony. This was the first major crack, but David needed more. This was just one day. He needed a pattern. He needed irrefutable proof that would tell a story so clear, no lawyer could obscure it. The investigation continued, and the unblinking eye kept watching. It watched Michael load heavy coolers and fishing gear into his boat. It watched him carry a large, flat-screen television from his car into his house without assistance. It watched him play a vigorous game of fetch in his backyard with his dog, running and twisting with an ease that was utterly irreconcilable with the man in the physical therapy videos. The investigators compiled a highlight reel of these contradictions, a silent film of betrayal set to the mundane soundtrack of suburban life. Each clip was time-stamped, each action a direct refutation of a specific claim he had made under oath. The web of lies Michael had spun so carefully was now being documented, strand by broken strand, by an eye that never slept. David Clark held the evidence in his hands, not as a collection of suspicions, but as a narrative of fraud, waiting for its final chapter to be written in a courtroom. Back at his office, David Clark sat in the pale glow of his computer monitor, the silent film of Michael Weller's double life playing out before him. This was no longer just about insurance fraud. It was a study in human duality, a chilling portrait of a life lived in two frames. He began the meticulous work of editing the footage, not to manipulate, but to juxtapose. He created a split-screen narrative that was more damning than any witness testimony could ever be. On the left side of the screen, he placed clips from the official, court-mandated physical therapy sessions. There was Michael, his face a mask of strained suffering, struggling to perform a simple leg lift, his body trembling with what appeared to be unbearable agony, his movements slow and cautious, as if navigating a field of broken glass. On the right side of the screen, he placed the surveillance footage from the very same week. The contrast was so jarring, it was almost comical. Here was the same man, bending fluidly to lift a heavy car engine block, his movements sure and powerful. Here he was, swinging an axe to split firewood in his backyard, the motion full and unrestrained. David synced the timelines perfectly. One clip showed Michael, during a therapy session, wincing in pain as a therapist gently palpated his lower back. The corresponding clip, from just hours later, showed him hefting a large bag of concrete mix onto his shoulder at a home improvement store without a flicker of discomfort. It was a devastating visual argument. The man on the left was a prisoner of his own body. The man on the right was its master. This was the heart of the deception, laid bare in high definition. The perfect ache was a phantom, banished by the sunlight of ordinary life, only to reappear under the fluorescent lights of a medical office. David compiled this evidence into a single, seamless video file. It needed no dramatic music, no ominous voiceover. The truth, in this case, was a silent, brutal force. He labeled the file with a sense of finality. It was ready. The unblinking eye had captured not just a lie, but the entire anatomy of a betrayal, and it was now prepared to testify. The air in the courtroom was cool and still, heavy with the scent of old wood and anticipation. Michael Weller sat at the defense table, his posture carefully curated into a semblance of brokenness. He projected an image of a man worn down by pain and the relentless machinery of the legal system. Across the room, David Clark sat with the prosecuting attorney, a folder of damning evidence resting on the table before them. The preliminary statements were a familiar dance, but everyone in the room could feel the tension building towards a single, pivotal moment. The prosecution began its case, methodically laying the foundation. They called the insurance adjusters, the skeptical doctors, establishing the timeline of claims and the escalating inconsistencies in Michael's story. His defense attorney fought back, attempting to paint a picture of a man in genuine agony, a victim of a system that was now trying to avoid paying what it rightfully owed. He spoke of good days and bad days, of the unpredictable nature of chronic pain, of the emotional toll this entire process had taken on his client. But then the prosecution called its key witness, the silent, unblinking eye. A large screen was activated in the courtroom. The prosecutor stood and addressed the judge. "Your Honor, the state would like to present Exhibit A." For a moment, there was only the soft hum of the projector. Then the video began to play. It started with the left side of the screen, showing Michael in a physical therapy session, his face contorted, his movements hesitant and pained as he attempted a simple exercise. A wave of sympathetic murmurs rippled through the courtroom. This was the man the defense wanted them to see. But then, the right side of the screen flickered to life, It showed Michael, on the very same day, in his garage, effortlessly lifting a heavy toolbox above his head. The gasp in the room was audible. The split-screen presentation continued, a relentless parade of contradiction. There he was, struggling to put on his socks in a medical evaluation, and there he was, minutes later, loading heavy equipment into his boat. The visual evidence was undeniable, a brutal, silent narrative of deceit. Michael could feel the eyes of the jury, the judge, everyone in the room, shifting from sympathy to cold, hard scrutiny. The perfect facade he had maintained for years was crumbling in real time under the weight of his own recorded actions. The prosecution didn't need to say a word. The video was the accuser, the judge, and the jury, all in one. When the screen finally went dark, a profound silence fell over the courtroom. The reckoning was complete. The truth was no longer a matter of opinion. It was a matter of record, etched into the memory of everyone present. The silence that followed the video was heavier than any sound. It was the weight of a lie, fully exposed. All eyes turned from the blank screen to the man at the defense table. Michael Weller's carefully constructed posture of pain seemed to deflate, not into genuine suffering, but into a posture of pure defeat. The mask was gone, shattered by the irrefutable evidence of his own double life. The defense attorney's subsequent arguments sounded hollow, like whispers in a storm. They tried to suggest the video was misleading, taken out of context, that it showed rare moments of adrenaline overpowering constant pain. But the spell was broken. The jury had seen the truth with their own eyes, and no amount of legal rhetoric could unseen it. Then the judge spoke. Not the bailiff, not the attorneys. The judge. His voice was calm, measured, and cut through the room with the sharp, clean finality of a gavel. He began not with the sentencing, but with a methodical, point-by-point dismantling of Michael Weller's entire fraudulent edifice. "The court has observed," he began, his eyes fixed on Michael, "a profound and calculated betrayal. It is not merely the betrayal of an insurance system, a system built on a covenant of good faith designed to protect genuine victims. It is a betrayal of the co-workers who supported you, the medical professionals who tried to treat you, and the public trust that holds our society together." He referenced specific clips from the video, contrasting Michael's claimed incapacities with his documented abilities. "You claimed you could not lift more than 5 pounds, yet you were recorded lifting a car battery weighing over 40. You testified that bending caused excruciating pain, yet surveillance shows you bending freely to work on an automobile for hours. This was not a case of a bad back. This was a case of a broken moral compass." He spoke of the millions of dollars stolen, not from a faceless corporation, but from a pool of money that belonged to all policyholders, driving up costs for everyone. He spoke of the real victims, the genuinely injured workers whose claims would now be viewed with greater suspicion because of frauds like this. And then came the moment of catarsis. The court finds the defendant guilty on all counts of insurance fraud, perjury, and grand larceny. He detailed the sentence: restitution of every cent of the $2 million, plus substantial fines, and a prison term of 7 to 10 years. As the final words left his lips, and the sound of the gavel echoed through the silent courtroom, a sharp, crisp crack that felt less like a sound and more like a physical force. It was over. Justice had not been swift, but it had been thorough. It had been blind, but in its conclusion, it saw everything. The judge's sentence was the final, definitive word, restoring balance and delivering the powerful, satisfying conclusion that the entire narrative had been building towards. The gavel's echo faded, but its resonance would linger for years in the hollow spaces of Michael Weller's life. As bailiffs led him away, the courtroom remained suspended in that rare atmosphere where justice feels tangible, not as revenge, but as restoration. The judge's sentence had done more than punish a crime. It had drawn a clear, bright line through the gray areas where greed masquerades as need. What makes this story linger isn't the sophistication of the scheme, but its heartbreaking simplicity. An ordinary man who believed the rules didn't apply to him, who thought he could live 2 lives forever, But the universe has a way of balancing its books. The very technology meant to protect property, the unblinking security cameras, became the instrument of truth. The system designed to help genuine victims became the trap that caught a predator. There's a profound twist in this conclusion that goes beyond the courtroom. Michael Weller didn't just lose his freedom and ill-gotten gains. He lost something irreplaceable: the trust of his community, the respect of his family, and most poisonously, the ability to ever genuinely ask for help again. Every future ache, every real pain, will be viewed through the lens of his deception. The man who cried wolf now faces a lifetime of silent suffering. This is the ultimate price of fraud. Not what you pay to the system, but what you steal from your own future self. If this story made you feel that surge of righteous satisfaction when the judge delivered the verdict, then you understand why we tell these tales. We're drawn to these narratives not for the schadenfreude, but for the reaffirmation of order in a chaotic world. We need to see that consequences exist, that truth matters, that the scales eventually balance. So, I leave you with this question. In your own life, where have you seen the line between cleverness and corruption? Between taking what you want and earning what you deserve? The comment section is open, and your perspectives are what make this community thrive. Share your thoughts on where we draw these lines in our own lives.